about 20 years, starting in the late 1940s, Wyoming football was a very successful program. In all, the Cowboys owned 15 conference titles. Last season, they came 4 points shy of their 16th in the Mountain West Conference title game after winning a division title for the first time in 20 years. Can the Cowboys catch Boise State for a second straight Mountain Championship with Josh Allen leading the way? We'll discuss those possibilities as well as the players to keep an eye on for the 2018 NFL Draft as we go one-on-one with Robert Gagliardi, senior sports editor and beat writer for Wyoming football on the OFN Meeting Room with Greg DePalma. All right, it's November 15th, 2017. I'm Greg DePalma. Thanks for tuning in to the OFN Meeting Room as we talk Wyoming football with Robert Gagliardi. Robert, thanks for joining us today.
You bet. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
All right, Robert. So you actually, your work gets distributed to both Laramie and Cheyenne newspapers. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay. How long have you been doing that for? You a lifer in the state?
I am a lifer. I've been doing this for almost 25 years now.
Wow. Beautiful country, huh? Beautiful state.
Yeah. It's a good place to live. Weather can be a little tricky. Not going to lie to you, but it's been a lot of fun so far.
Now, when Craig Bull started to turn things around there last year, I don't know. I started to sense something, and that was similar. And I guess the reason I wanted to just throw this right off the bat, since we're talking about the beautiful country, because when I think about some successful programs out west, of course we think of, and not from the power schools, but you think of Boise State. And so I had mentioned a few times to some analysts, to Dan Shanka as well, and about is it possible for Craig Bull to do at Wyoming what Chris Peterson and so forth, what they've been, and Dan Hawkins before him, what they were able to accomplish at Boise State? Do you think that's possible?
Oh, yes and no, I guess, because now that what Boise State accomplished, and certainly not taking anything away from what it's done and its run of consistent great success over the years. It's a little bit different now with the college football playoff. Now, when Boise State was making its runs and going to BCS bowls, I mean, the BCS doesn't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. So it's a little different. It's a little different system. But to say that can't happen at Wyoming would be false. But to say that it can and it will would be, I don't know if it's premature, but it would be tough. It would be tough. But to say that it can't, nothing's impossible. And what Craig Bull has been able to do here so far, I'm not sure, I think people were certainly hopeful, and I know athletic director Tom Berman was hopeful when he hired him. That was kind of the purpose. But I think anything's possible, and the strides they've made have been incredible, but a lot of things would have to fall their way. But what we've seen so far and some of the barriers that this program has broken down since Craig Bull has been here, I wouldn't say absolutely no way it can happen, but I wouldn't say it's going to happen tomorrow either.
Do you feel like Craig is somebody that will be there for a while? Not, of course, whether the people at Wyoming want him, but whether or not, because we've seen a lot of other coaches there use that as a means to a bigger job. So do you think that's something that's inevitable, or do you think he could turn the program around enough where they can have a lot of success there in time, that even if he does decide to leave, that he'll be leaving a really good situation?
Right. My feeling, and even just visiting with Craig, even like before practices or not necessarily in an interview setting, is that this is his last rodeo, so to speak. No pun intended with the Western reference there. But look, when he was at North Dakota State, he had a lot of chances to go to other schools and Power 5 schools and everything, and he didn't. Now to say that there's no way he's going to leave Wyoming, we all know what happens in big-time college athletics. Anything can happen at any time. So I'm not saying that, but I really do get a sense from Craig that, he wants to get this turned around and get it turned around to where he wants it and thinks it can go. And then when he's done, I mean, he's about 60 years old. He's going to retire and buy a ranch somewhere, whether it's in Wyoming or somewhere, and quote unquote right off into the sunset. So, I truly get a sense that he's in this for the long haul. Now, again, we know anything can happen. And as jobs pop open or are going to pop open, you never know. But I say this to a lot of Wyoming fans. Well, I write about this to a lot of Wyoming fans, and I don't know how much they want to hear it. And you brought up a good point. Wyoming has been a stepping stone for a lot of coaches, going back to Bob Devaney and the likes of those guys. But it's been more than 20 years since Wyoming had a coach, quote unquote, use it as a stepping stone to something bigger.
Yeah.
And not that you want that. You never want to see that happen. But for a program that's kind of had its ups and downs, or just to be the kindest, has been inconsistent as far as success, I don't know if it would be necessarily a bad thing to see a coach move on to something bigger and better, because it means they've done some good things here. That hasn't, for the last 20 years, that hasn't happened. So, and I'm not saying, I hope Craig Bohl goes somewhere else, but that wouldn't be necessarily a bad thing for Wyoming football, because it's getting back on the right track. So, but I do. I mean, they extended Craig's contract after last season, and again with these bigger schools and the money they have, those buyouts are easily, handled. But I do get a sense that Craig really wants to see this out. He wants to get it to where he wants it, and then when his time has come, he's gonna retire, enjoy the rest of his life. So I honestly don't expect him to just jump at the next big job or opportunity, because he could have done it long time ago at North Dakota State, and he just doesn't seem like he's wired that way.
All right, and of course he is an alum of Nebraska. So, and of course, you never know what's going on over there. I would happen to think, sometimes I think when these coaches have the type of success that they have, depending on exactly where they are in their life, you kind of think to yourself, well, I mean, that's what I mean. I was talking a few weeks ago at a Central Florida conversation regarding Scott Frost, and that he, there's talk, well, would he go to Florida? And it was like, well, why would he go to Florida? That doesn't make any sense. And to me, it was like, well, I guess if he's going to go anywhere, wouldn't he go to Nebraska? I mean, wouldn't that be the one spot that would change his mind and say, you know what? Yeah, maybe that is my dream job. That's my alma mater. And I wonder whether or not that would be the same thing for someone like Craig Bohl. Would be if the Nebraska job does come up at some point in the next year or two, would that be the one spot where he would go, yeah, I can't pass that one up?
I could certainly see it. I mean, he still has family in Lincoln. Obviously, he worked there. He went to school there. He's very, very tight with Tom Osborne. And I know Tom's not, actively, he's not the AD or anything, but he still has a lot of pull over there. So, yeah, I mean, to say that there's no way that Craig Bohl doesn't, formulate into that equation somehow, or fans shouldn't be at least aware of that, that would be naive thinking. So if that scenario came up and he went, it certainly wouldn't surprise me. But, I also get a sense that, Craig has been a builder of programs, and he's done very well. He took over a North Dakota State program that was transitioning to 1AA or FCS or whatever they're calling it these days, and got him to be a power. And he's in that process now. And, I'm not sure not to say that he couldn't do it at Nebraska. Sure. I have no reason to believe he wouldn't, but that's a lot of work and time. And I think he's just at a point in his career now. If this was 10 years ago, maybe it's a different conversation. I just don't get the sense from him that that's something that he's looking for right now. But again, there are the ties there. There's a lot of things that tie him there. And if it came up, I wouldn't be surprised if he looked, he listened. And even if it happened, but at this point, I'm just not seeing it.
Okay. Well, what about, how are you seeing, because last year they lost some key guys, and we all knew, matter of fact, Dan Shanka and I, we talked about it in the off season before the season began, about Josh Allen and how he was rising up the draft boards, and yet knowing how much more difficult it was going to be for him to compare his stats and his overall play and the winning of the team from last year because of the key players that left. He loses his top running back, Brian Hill, 1,800 yards, 22 touchdowns. Right now, their leading runner is Trey Woods with 416 yards. He loses his top two receivers, one with 1,300 yards receiving, and Tanner Gentry. He even loses Jacob Hollister, and he's with New England right now. He loses another draft pick off on the offensive line. So there's some key guys that left him on offense, and it's not surprising to see that his numbers have dropped a little bit. So How is the recruiting going over the last couple of years, especially last year with the success? Is it possible that this is just maybe even though they're winning, it's not like they're having a bad season, but Josh Allen may be leaving at the end of this season. Do you think that the program is still headed in the right direction with some of the talent that you see, that when Allen leaves, they're going to be okay?
Well, I think so. I mean, you never know. I mean, you just don't, at places like Wyoming, when a talent like a Josh Allen comes around, and when he goes, and I do fully expect him to go after this season. Be nice to see him come back for his senior year, but I just don't foresee that. But, I think they're heading in a good direction, because when you look at it, you look at this Wyoming roster, yeah, probably you lose Josh Allen, but they only have a handful of seniors on this team, and some of them are good players, but to say they're irreplaceable, I think would be a stretch. So
Okay.
I think they're heading in a good direction, recruiting wise. And I don't know if this is I think some of this is an indication is they were really, well, every year. I've never heard a coach or a program say, oh, this recruiting class is just okay or average.
Yeah.
But, they played about 10 true freshmen this year. And even in the off season, after they signed this class, they thought this class could really kind of define what they want to do here at Wyoming. And they come out of fall camp and they start 2 true freshmen on the offensive line. And that's not because there were injuries here or something else. They felt those were the 2 best guys that gave them the best chance to win. Now, the coaches made that decision, and still to start 2 true freshmen on the offensive line is a little unnerving, especially one being a center, but, I think they are in good shape. You just, it's hard to tell what it'll look like, next year or years after.
Sure.
When you lose such high caliber players. But on paper, and, seeing who's been out there and playing, and even, on the scout team, I like kind of where the direction's going with this program, to where they can be, wouldn't be maybe the ebbs and flows as we've seen from 7 or 8 wins to down to 3 and stuff, to where they can consistently be, in that 6 to 8 win range, competing, at least in contention for divisional titles and stuff. I think it's well on its way to getting to that point.
Where do most of the kids come from that play for a program like Wyoming? Because I got to imagine, I mean, even Boise, you just wondered, I mean, where are they getting these guys? I mean, how are they? I mean, because some of the players coming out there weren't, I mean, of course, you had a lot of maybe lunch pail, blue collar type players, but still, I mean, there's talent. And obviously, a lot of that is coaching. No question about that. And you got to recruit the right players for the right system that you're running. So what's the trick, if there is one, and how you can recruit and win at a place like Wyoming?
Well, with this staff, and every staff's been a little bit different, but one thing that Craig did when Craig Bowl came here is he talked to a lot of former Wyoming coaches like Joe Tiller and Paul Roach and guys who had success here, and how they did it, or what kind of their approach was. And with this staff, they recruit, they try to keep their guys in state, and every year,
Mm-hmm.
You might get 1 or 2 from Wyoming. It's, a small state. There's not a ton of Division I talent every year, but to say there's no Division I talent would be wrong. I mean, their middle linebacker, Logan Wilson from Casper, was the Mountain West Freshman of the Year and is playing at an all-conference level this year. They got a tight end named Austin Ford, who is playing very well right now, and after an injury in fall camp. There's guys in the state, but obviously with it being so small, you can't just build off that, but you keep them within their borders. They recruit the Denver area very hard along the Front Range. Denver's the closest metropolitan city, and they've always recruited Denver and the state of Colorado very hard. This staff recruits California very, very hard, in both northern and southern California. And they go into the Midwest a lot. They go into the Chicago area. They go up into Minneapolis area. They go into Oklahoma a little bit. They have a coach with some pretty strong ties there. So they kind of go a little bit everywhere and anywhere, but those are probably, with this staff, probably their biggest recruiting bases to get players.
All right. So Josh Allen, talk about what it is that you've seen from him. And again, I know it's because it's very difficult for people who don't follow him every game and watch every throw to understand just how much he's either developing or if his game is developing properly, considering the talent level is gone. So what have you noticed?
What I've noticed from Josh, and I know, look, you alluded to it earlier, or, lost so many good quality and productive weapons from last year. And there were some guys that played last year that had to step into some bigger roles. And there's been some ups and downs with that. And look, if you would have told me at this point of the season that Wyoming would have 7 wins and still in contention for a division title, and Wyoming's offense would be second to last in the FBS in total offense, I would have told you were nuts.
Yeah.
There's no way. But I think what Josh has done, and even though the numbers don't indicate it, I think in a lot of ways he played better than he did last year. The completion, there were 2 things they wanted Josh to improve on the most, and that was his completion percentage and cutting down on the interceptions, which was 15 last year. Now, the numbers don't indicate the completion percentage is a marked difference, but he's not throwing nearly as many interceptions. He's not turning the ball over nearly as much, which is good. He's not missing as many throws, whether that means turnovers or not, which I think is good. And he's just been a very good, not that he wasn't last year, but he's just been a very good leader to go through. He's not concerned about how many yards he throws for or how many touchdowns he gets. He just wants to help this football team win. And if that's sometimes with his arm, oftentimes it's been with his legs. Oftentimes it's kind of been on the defense too. But and I know it probably doesn't make a lot of sense, but like I said, I do think he's played better this year in a lot of respects than he did last year, even though raw numbers and data don't indicate it. But the thing that stands out to me about Josh more than anything is just the competitiveness. And we all know, look, these athletes are out there. They're all competitors. It's kind of a loose term, but this kid just has something extra when it comes to that you don't see very often with college kids. I know they're all competitors, but the way Josh is, there's just another gear to that. And I think more than anything, how he's handled that and how he's handled a season like this where maybe numbers aren't always great or this or that, to me says way more about a guy like Josh Allen and even maybe his abilities at the next level than it does about how many touchdowns he's thrown or his completion percentage or anything like that.
Well, what do you think about that? Because that is the knock on him as far as at the next level. Oh, he's got a great arm. He's got big size, tough kid, but he's a little erratic. And he just, as you mentioned, they want his completion percentage to be up. That at the next level is a huge thing. Even though I will say that I know that we talked a lot about that. Dan Shonka and I talked a lot about that was something that even someone like Deshaun Watson needed to improve upon. Was his accuracy, and yet he goes on and he finds a way. So what is it about Josh Allen where you think he can find a way, even though it is necessary for him to have a better completion percentage? Of course, at the NFL, 56% in the NFL is not going to work. So do you see that as something where you kind of feel that this is the type of kid that can get that done?
I do, just because of his makeup. I mean, the physical tools are there. Whether he's completing, 60% of his passes or 50, the physical tools are there, and the scouts can see that. Heck, you and I can see that and everything. But I think where I think Josh can do is, I think with any scenario, it depends on the fit. Who takes him? What's the scenario? I mean, if just throwing this as a hypothetical, let's say if a team like Cleveland, and everyone likes to beat up on Cleveland, took him and then throws him out there in that dysfunctional train wreck of what that franchise is, you're setting him up to failure. But, like you mentioned Deshaun Watson, Bill O'Brien has worked with quarterbacks, arguably maybe worked with one of the best ever in Tom Brady, and they put him in good situations. But Josh Allen is not one of these kids, at least from what I've gotten to know him and being around him, not that I'm like best friends with him, but he's just a very grounded kid. I mean, he grew up on a farm in Central California. I mean, his work ethic is there. His want to is there. I mean, no one wanted this kid. No one wanted him in high school. No one wanted him in junior college.
Why didn't anybody want him? What was it? I mean, obviously you got an arm like that. That didn't just appear out of nowhere. So what was it?
Well, he was about 185 pounds when he was in high school. So
okay.
I think some of the, granted the height was there and some of the arm strength and those types of things were there. But, a lot of these coaches in this day and age, if it's not prototypical or this and that, they just, they pass on kids like that. And even at junior college, there wasn't a lot of, after 1 year, their numbers were good, but it wasn't clicking for a lot of coaches. So but that kind of it almost, it's like he has a chip on his shoulder that I'm going to prove you people wrong, and that's a powerful tool with kids and
Yes.
in anything, whether it's business or sports or whatever. So, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say Josh Allen will be a Hall of Fame NFL quarterback, but no matter what happens or where he goes or what situation, he's going to put in the work and the want to, because that's just how he's wired. That's how he was raised. That's how it's been. And I think that will help him overcome, whether it's, a bad situation or whatever has to happen, that'll work to his advantage, those intangibles that maybe you don't see with a lot of these other guys.
You think his stock is really going to rise when he gets to the combine, if he does come out this year, and the coaches they get to talk to him, and of course they see his arm and his size. You think that his stock is definitely going to rise that much further than maybe some of the other top quarterbacks he'll go up against, that he'll have a legitimate chance to be the top quarterback and top player picked in the draft?
Well, it certainly could, and I hope he gets the opportunity. I'm sure he'll get an opportunity to go to those types of things and show what he can do. It's such a crapshoot. I mean, we've seen guys go to the combine and just light things up at numerous positions, and then it just doesn't translate because,
Sure.
the combines and like pro days, those are set up for these guys to be successful. I mean, they're not set up for guys to fail, to be honest with you, but I think what they're seeing in film study and when they actually meet with these guys and go over film, crunching film and formations and sets and checks and things like that, I think that's where maybe Josh Allen's stock will rise and fall, so to speak. I mean, I don't know if he went to the combine and lit it up, does his stock go up? It probably does. If he goes and has a horrible time, does it fall? Maybe so too. But I think so much more goes into it than just what happens at these combines. I think more happens when all these scouts are coming to watch him practice or coming to these games.
Okay.
And more than anything, the one-on-one interviews when he goes and visits the team and visits with the coach or the coordinator or this and that. To me, that's where the real nuts and bolts of draft stock falling or soaring really comes into play.
Let's talk for the remaining time we have. I wanted to ask you about some of the other guys, the other players that could be on the radar as far as the NFL draft. I think the top-rated player for our lads right now is safety Andrew Wingard, who was and maybe possibly still is the number 3 rated strong safety for the draft if he comes out as an underclassman. So there's an underclass number 3 rating. 131 tackles last year, which is a huge number. 89 so far this year. Is he the top prospect on the team?
I would say he was maybe among them. I got a sense that he won't come out this year. But again, we never know how those things are going to work. But I think he's a pretty athletic kid. I mean, this is a kid who not just played football, but he played basketball. He's a skier. He's just a really good athlete with just really, really great instincts. As far as playing the safety, runs well, tackles well. Very rarely has he missed tackles, but he's up there. One guy I would probably list, and again, I don't think he's coming out as a defensive end named Carl Granderson, who this is a 6'6" kid who was a wide receiver in high school, and this is kind of the epitome of what Wyoming kind of does in its recruiting, where and Craig Bohl said this when he was hired, it's a developmental program. They're not getting 4 and 5 star guys, but they're looking for guys that that are the right fit. I think Craig Bohl's mission when he goes on recruiting is like, we want kids with laser-like focus who want to win conference championships and get a meaningful degree. And Carl Granderson is kind of one of those guys where he was a 6'6", 180, maybe 190 pound wide receiver in high school. And now he's a 6'6", 250, 255 pound defensive end who's absolutely wreaking havoc, who can get bigger and stronger and still not lose some of that explosiveness. I don't know where he ranks right now as far as some of the data you're getting, but I could see him with another year of development being, I don't know about a first round pick, but he could certainly be a pro prospect with his ability and tools that he has physically.
Yeah, he's got 6.5 sacks, 13 tackles for loss, leads the team in both categories. Also rated at our lads, you have the fullback, is right now one of the top 15 rated fullback, senior fullbacks. And it's is it pronounced? Pronounced Van Manen? Is that how you pronounce it?
Van Manen.
Van
Is how it's
Manen.
pronounced.
Okay, so Van Manen, and again, he's up there. And then also a couple other corners, Rico Gafford and Robert Priester. How are those guys? Because I got to imagine, I mean, you got a secondary there with Priester, with Gafford, with Wingard. That sounds like a pretty good secondary.
Yeah, the back end has been very good. Rico Gafford is a junior college kid, and Wyoming rarely goes the junior college route. They've done it a little bit, but like last year, they didn't have any junior college recruits. But is a very athletic kid that's shown, good burst, decent, very good ball skills. I think he would probably at least garner a look in an NFL camp. And Robert Priester was part of Craig Bohl's first recruiting class here from Florida. Although they haven't gone back into Florida to recruit, and he's just kind of been steady. There's been times where he started. There's been times where he's come off the bench and not played much, but has had a good season and has improved his open field tackling a lot since his freshman year. So I don't know where they would go. I think they would probably get looks and maybe get into some camps.
Sure.
But they certainly had good senior seasons so far for Wyoming, which has been very important.
Yeah, Gafford and Wingard are tied with the team lead with 4 interceptions apiece. Any other players that we should be keeping an eye on under the radar guys, or maybe freshmen or sophomores?
Well, I think, if you look at the offensive line, Ryan Cummings is a senior this year who was, he broke his foot mid-season last year and then came back. This year he's had concussion issues and came back, and then he came down with an awful illness. And we're not just talking strep throat, we're talking a serious illness that had him in the hospital for about 10 days. He's played guard and tackle in his career, so I think there's a chance where he could get into something. But probably their best offensive lineman right now is a junior named Caden Jackson, who's a guard. I'm not privy to all the grading and everything,
sure.
But from what I gather, I think he's probably been their most consistent offensive lineman so far. I think he's got a chance to be a pretty good prospect for him. I think Logan Wilson as a sophomore, as a middle linebacker, has a chance to, if he continues to grow and develop. He moves well, he tackles well, he's a very physical guy, kind of a prototypical middle linebacker is in a 4-3 Tampa 2 scheme that Wyoming runs. I think he's someone to watch, and I also think the safety next to Wingard, Marcus Epps, a former walk-on who has been a 2-year team captain, who's been just as probably as productive and important to Wyoming's entire defense as Wingard's been this year. I think those are guys that could be on the radar of NFL teams.
All right, so what do you think the rest of the season? They'd have it's asking a lot for them to win this division. At least they're in it, but they're going to need Boise basically to lose their last 2, and then they're going to have to win their last 2. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Yeah, and with Air Force, it's not a bad opponent for Boise State, but they are at home and they're playing great football. Then at Fresno State, Wyoming's got Fresno State this week, and that should be a good game this week with Fresno. Fresno's having a surprisingly good year under Jeff Tedford, so. And that's the final home game for some seniors, and possibly the final home game for Josh Allen. So, you expect a big crowd?
Should be a good crowd. It's a noon start in mid-November. The weather's not supposed to be great. It's not supposed to snow or be a blizzard, but it's going to be chilly. But I hope it's a good crowd for him. And look, Josh Allen hurt his shoulder against Air Force last week. Nothing didn't dislocate it. They're being pretty hush about it, but he hasn't practiced yet this week, and they're hopeful to get him back. But if there's one team that Josh Allen wants to play against, it's Fresno State, because he grew up 45 minutes from Fresno. And again, one of the many schools that didn't want anything to do with him. So if there's a way or a will for Josh Allen to play this week, he's going to find it. But even if he doesn't, we'll see. But yeah, you got 2 of the better defensive teams in the Mountain West, and Fresno and Wyoming. And then it should be interesting. It should be a good game. It might be just one of those 10-7 type games, the way these 2 teams play defense. But look, Wyoming hasn't done, they're 7-3, but to say they've done it pretty would be a lie. They've just kind of grinded things out, made plays when they've had to. It's just kind of the Wyoming way, a very blue collar, tough, just find a way to get it done type things. And whether Josh Allen plays or not, I think Wyoming will play hard, and we'll see what happens. I mean, this team has surprised me. There's times when I thought there's no way they're going to come back from this, or there's no way this offense can go and drive the length of the field after what it's done, but it finds a way, and that's what's kind of epitomized this Wyoming team. Is no matter what it's faced with, injuries or illnesses or matchups, they've found a way somehow. So I wouldn't put it past them to win out, and see what happens in a bowl game. But I certainly like the trajectory, the way the program's going, and the mindset that's been established here so far of just finding a way to get it done. And so far, Wyoming's done a pretty good job of that.
If Allen doesn't play, is the player who gets to start, the quarterback, is he the starter next year?
He would probably have the inside chance. He's a junior right now named Nick Smith, who's been he was part of Bowl's first recruiting class that they basically only had about 2 weeks to put together, because when Bowl was hired, he was still in his run of their last national championship at North Dakota State and stayed to coach for that. And once he got done, then they all came and threw that class together. But, Nick Smith played 5 games as a redshirt freshman in 2015 because of injuries to quarterbacks, and had some moments. He's not the next Josh Allen or anything, but based on his experience and knowledge in the program, I would think he would have an edge to be the starter next year based on that. They've got a kid they're redshirting this year named Tyler Vanderwall, and know they're high on him. They've got a commitment from a quarterback from the Central California area that they like. So, but just on paper, just based on the experience, I would say Nick Smith has the definite edge of being the starter going into next season.
All right, and one more thing, and that is, I guess, as you mentioned, you're not expecting any snowstorms, Robert. It was fun. I think everybody around the country thought it was. Everybody gets excited when they see these snowstorms in these football games. Even though it was a pleasant snow game against Colorado State. It wasn't so bad that it was crazy for the players to even try to play in the game. It was almost like a perfect snowstorm, and fans get excited about that. So is that exciting for you guys as well, even though you're used to it up there?
Well, it's kind of cool when the elements become a part. I'll be honest, I'm still trying to dry out from that snow. It was a wet, heavy snow. It wasn't like a blizzard or anything. The wind wasn't blowing, which around here, when the wind doesn't blow, that's a news event, because the wind always blows up here. So, it was cool to be, and just, you saw it started raining early in the game and right before kickoff, and then it turned to a heavy rain, and then it was snow and the big wet flakes and the guys running through it and stuff. That's, you just don't see that very often. And it was cool to see and the dramatics of a rivalry game and how Wyoming was able to come back and win it. That was pretty cool. And, Wyoming fans, there's not a lot of them, to be honest with you, but they're pretty hardy folks. And yeah, some people left at halftime, but at most places, that stadium would have been pretty much empty after, when the weather comes in. A lot of Wyoming fans still stuck that out, and that says a lot about them, and also says a lot, kind of epitomizes what their football program's like too.
Robert, I appreciate it, definitely. Thanks a lot for joining us today, and we look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Well, sounds great. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. Again, that is Robert Gagliardi. He is the senior sports editor and beat writer for Wyoming, and he gets out his you can check out his articles at the various Laramie and Cheyenne newspapers in Wyoming. So I've been covering that program for a while, and as I said, it's very open. I know, because I think it was from late 40s to late 60s. So really, since I have been paying attention, to college football, since I've been understanding the game enough as a kid till now. So 40 years for the past for the past 40 years, Wyoming football just hasn't been very relevant. That's a long time. And you hear Wyoming, it's like, oh yeah, that's because like in the old days, it used to be like same thing people would talk about like with Northwestern, or Kansas State, maybe even Wisconsin. Before these coaches, Boise State, before these coaches took over the programs, a lot of legendary coaches, and changed the culture. And before you realized it, wow, you'd have to dig hard to remember when they weren't relevant. That's why I started the conversation with Robert about Craig Bohl and whether or not he can do something here. It would be a great story. It's, again, great country. It's beautiful. And, of course, we all enjoyed that snow game. We love the snow games as fans, especially when we can watch them on television. And we don't live there, so we don't have to worry about the snow. Unless, of course, you would want to go skiing or something. But thanks to Robert for updating us on what's going on in Wyoming football. We are not going to be done here today. We've got more of these interviews coming up. Now, we already did an interview with Ryan Fowler talking Alabama Crimson Tide football. That's available on the ourlads.com website. Coming up later in about a half hour if you're listening live, Brian Matthews, sports writer, covers Auburn for Rivals and Yahoo, so we'll talk Auburn Tigers football a little bit later on. We've got Ryan Abraham tomorrow talking USC football on our college football preview show at 2 o'clock. Right here on the Ourlads Football Radio Network, where it's never too early to think about the NFL Draft. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at PrimeSN and go to ourlads.com for the best college football depth charts in the industry. Once again, thanks to Robert Gagliardi and Greg DePalma. We'll see you next time right here in the OFN Meeting Room on the Ourlads Football Radio Network.